So this is the verse that I gave Sam to put out there in the little thing that she does. It's the first one, 22:15. And the Pharisees went and plotted how they might entangle Jesus in his talk. And felt the Lord drawing me to this particular section. There's 3 right in the row accounts. Not just right in the row in Scripture, but it says like farther down the same day. So we have an example of 3 different times when people were coming to our Lord and asking him questions so that they might entangle or snare him. And looking at that word, it's actually something I'm only familiar with, probably from Bugs Bunny cartoons, is noose traps. So it's that the piece of rope that's on the ground with the loop on it, and through some clever thing I didn't understand until I researched it, it somehow goes to a branch that's bent over, and then something goes into and wanders into the middle of it, and then triggers the branch pulling, and then the person gets, or the animal gets hoisted up. Of course, in the cartoons, it's always by like a leg, so it's nice and safe, and we can imagine that the animal is doing okay. He's just being held up by his leg, or maybe it's a big net, like in Star Wars. But the idea here is that the Pharisees are coming, and specifically they're creating this elaborate trap for Jesus. That it turns out, in its most simple form, in the research that I did, involves taking a couple of sticks and making little hooks in them, so they hook together, and then running the trap. And some of you maybe have learned how to actually do this because you're outdoorsy folks who like to live off the land at times. And you make this little hook thing and you run the noose out, and then that branch, of course, is the spring. It's the motion so in its simplest form, it's a pretty complicated thing to me, city guy. And then, of course, they get more complicated from that. If you want a more effective trap, then there's these whole systems where you take sticks and you lay them out, and you still have that same hooking mechanism, but then it goes to another stick that goes across so that it's more likely that the animal will come in and hit it and trigger it. And it's all a series of tensions where the sticks are holding each other against each other until somebody comes along and knocks it. And then that noose goes whoosh. So I thought that was particularly evocative to look into that and go, okay, so this is what the Pharisees had in mind when they come and ask this question that's being related in Matthew 22. We think we've got this clever trap, and we're going to lead this guy in that everybody's listening to and taking away from from them listening to us, because that's how it works. If somebody's being listened to, we're losing our influence, and we're going to take and we're going to set this elaborate system up, and then we're going to lure him into it, and he's going to trigger it, and he's going to be hoisted up. And they do it specifically. They're looking to get him to say something that they can go, aha, gotcha. And they sent to him their disciples with the Herodians, saying, "Teacher, we know that you're true and teach the way of God in truth. Nor do you care about anyone, for you do not regard the person of men. Tell us, therefore, what do you think? Is it lawful to pay taxes to Caesar or not?" But Jesus perceived their wickedness and said, "Why do you test me, you hypocrites? Show me the tax money." So they brought him a denarius. And he said to them, "Whose image and inscription is this?" And they said to him, "Caesar's." And he said, "Render therefore to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's." When they'd heard these words, they marveled and left him and went their way. So first time they come and they've got okay, is it A or B? You want to do this or this? Actually, it just reminds me of, we were just having a conversation with Stephanie's mom because she's caring for her sister who has Alzheimer's. And in many ways, it's like caring for a child who is, has all of the will of an adult, but sort of the understanding of a child sometimes, in trying to motivate her to do the things that she needs to do. And and she tells the stories, and I keep going, oh, that's kind of like dealing with a 9-year-old sometimes, or a 5-year-old. I'm the exact same sort of battles that I have as a parent. I'm like, I recognize this kind of thing. And we talked about, that technique, that sort of parenting 101 technique they give you for dealing with toddlers or 5-year-olds or even up, of going, you're trying to get a child to do something. And rather than just go do this thing, you do would you like to do this in one way, or would you like to do it another way? And it kind of lures them into the little trap of, oh, I get to make a decision and I'll do this one. And because you presented an A or B thing, when they're young enough, most of the time they don't even think, oh, there might be a C. And so you've got them doing what they need to do. And I see that in here. They're coming to this as like, so do we pay taxes or do we don't pay taxes? And Jesus answers them not with oh yeah, pay taxes, don't pay taxes. Although it's funny because people go to this verse as a we should pay taxes kind of thing, and sort of go right into, okay, here's the Pharisees' conversation they're presenting, when Jesus actually goes, and he does, he says, give Caesar what's Caesar's. But he takes it to another level and says, there's something deeper here than your little dichotomy that you've presented. And continuing on right after that, in the scripture, in Matthew 22 and 23, the same day the Sadducees, so this is the other side of the theological and political aisle. I knew they were theologically separate. I've just recently been reading about politically how separate they were too. So the Sadducees, they say, there is no resurrection. So there's no angels, there's no supernatural. They were focused on the law. They were like, in order to be good Jews, what you do is you take the law and you follow all the law, but all of that like miracle, resurrection, we don't believe. That's kind of silly stuff. Let's just do the right living stuff, as opposed to the Pharisees, who were conservative and like, we're actually believing all of these things that we've been, given as our history. But also politically, they were on opposite sides of the aisle, so to speak, in the sense that the Sadducees were supporters of Herod, who was not following the laws of God, who was essentially a puppet of Rome. So the Sadducees were actually supporters of the political regime of the day. They were okay with Israel just being subject to this empire. Whereas the Pharisees, being conservatives, were like, no, God gave us this land. We should have a nation. We should not be under the yoke of Rome. So not only are they theologically divided, but they're politically divided. And remarkably similar to the political divides we see now. I think it's interesting that, 2,000 years ago, you still have the sort of camps of, hey, you know what, let's just pick and choose. We've got some things that don't make a lot of common sense to us, so we'll throw those out. We'll follow these traditions because they're wise sayings about living. And we're good with a sort of secular government that's going to be controlling us. And then you have this other side, which is the conservative theological side, also going, you know what, we're supposed to have this God-run country. So the Sadducees, who say there's no resurrection, came to him and asked him, saying, Teacher, Moses said if a man dies having no children, his brother shall marry his wife and raise up offspring for his brother. So they're doing essentially their whole system of arguing with the Pharisees was to go, if you can't show me this stuff out of the law, I'm not going to believe it. So if you can go ahead and tell me about miracles happening, but all I know of God is what is in the commandments that he gave. So if we can refute your miracles in your history with things out of the law, then we can show, that the supernatural stuff is a lot of stuff made up by men. So they go to the law to try to show that there's no resurrection. Moses said that if a man dies having no children, his brother shall marry his wife and raise up offspring for his brother. Now there were set with us 7 brothers. And the first died after he had married, and having no offspring, left his wife to his brother. Likewise the second also, and the third, even to the 7th. Last of all, the woman died also. Therefore, in the resurrection, whose wife of the 7 will she be? For they all had her. Jesus answered and said to them, "You're mistaken, not knowing the Scriptures nor the power of God. For in the resurrection, they neither marry nor are given in marriage, but are like angels of God in heaven. But concerning the resurrection of the dead, have you not read what was spoken to you by God, saying, I am the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. God is not the God of the dead, but of the living." But when the multitudes heard this, they were astonished at his teaching. So again, he has the same response to some people who are coming and going, okay, so we've got this theological question. Can you answer which one is she going to be the wife of? In order to try to poke holes. And his response is, you know what? You're not asking the right question. Let me tell you truth about the Lord God. And then we continue on. So they're taking turns today. It was like, let's go trap Jesus Day. And they're playing tag team on both sides of the political and theological aisle. First, let's have the conservatives go at him and see if we can get him ensnared. And they're like, no, that didn't work. Okay, liberal camp, you try it. And then they come in and they're like, that didn't work either. But when the Pharisees heard that he'd silent the Sadducees, they'd gathered together. Okay, they didn't do it. It's our turn now. Then one of them, a lawyer, asked him a question, testing him and saying, "Teacher, which is the great commandment in the law?" So there are, according to rabbinical tradition, 613 mitzvot. Those are the commandments. And at some point, a rabbi sat down and wrote a big list. Since then, other rabbis have sat down and written other lists because they thought that rabbi was slightly off. I've got another list of the 613 commandments I can find in Scripture. And it's a matter of debate, as far as I can tell, still to this day. And shortly after this time, about a century after this time, Rabbi Judah, the prince, who was a student of Gamaliel the younger, who was a student of Gamaliel the elder, who you'll recognize was the teacher of Paul, sat down and put together, one of the things he did was he wrote down and codified the Mishnah, which is the oral tradition. So for years, the idea was it's being passed down from rabbi to rabbi. We never write it down. It's the oral tradition. And by their tradition, it goes back to, at the same time the law was given on the mountain, there was also this verbal, here's an explanation of what all of that means. And you're going to have to keep it so you can explain it to people, and nobody will be able to understand the law unless they go to somebody who has heard from somebody who has heard from somebody all the way back to Moses how to interpret the law that's been written down. But conveniently enough, this rabbi, about a century after this, decided maybe it's time to write it down. He also said there's no law none of the mitzvot are any more important than any others. So he laid it out. Essentially, the idea is, you got to try to keep all of them. If you start going, hey, one of them's more important than the other, then you're going to miss some. And if you miss some, they're going to lead you to missing others, and then you'll be missing all of them. So he laid out an argument for all of them being equal. So this is a matter of debate in this day, and it's still, if you start researching today, if you go in and start looking for Jewish voices on what are the most important commandments to observe, you'll get a whole host of answers. So 2,000 years later, it's still a matter of debate. So which is the great commandment in the law? And Jesus said to him, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the first and great commandment, and the second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these 2 commandments hang all the law and prophets." So The Pharisees have come, and they're asking, a lawyer asks, not which is A or B, but which of 613 options, which one's most important? And Jesus answers this one and this one, and yet at the same time, he points to something even more than just answering. Option, whatever, A and B are your most important ones, because he's actually pointing to the covenant in that moment, the new covenant that where the law is written on the heart. He's actually pointing to, the Sermon on the Mount of, okay, yeah, you say that you shouldn't kill anybody. It's written, you shouldn't kill anybody. But if you're angry with somebody and you call them a fool, you've committed murder in your heart. He's pointing to all of these laws are all founded on love the Lord, your God, with all your heart, and love others as yourself. And I'm here. I'm going to go to the cross, and then I'm going to pour out my Spirit, and my Spirit is going to write this in there in a way that all those commandments are going to be a living part of who you are, and you're not going to have debates anymore about 613, which are the 613 and which ones are more important. So he takes their pretty simple multiple choice 613 option question and goes, you're asking the wrong question. I'll answer it and point you to something better. So we know in John 15, 18 through 20, he talks about, if the world hated you, you know that it hated me before it hated you. If you were in the world would love his own. But because you're not of the world, but I've chosen you out of the world, therefore the world hates you. Remember the word that I said unto you, the servant's not greater than his Lord. If they persecuted me, they will also persecute you. If they've kept my saying, they will also keep yours. And I just take the spirit of that, in that I see that this is the trap being laid for the church right now. It has been. But if Pharisees and Sadducees came to our Lord and laid out A or B questions for him to entice him into a snare, that's what the spirit of this age is doing to the church. And the danger has never been greater for our witness to the world, because we have insane amount of power right now in just the hands of ordinary people, us. Communication has sped up. We all know. The barriers have been removed. Our voices have been amplified to a ridiculous extent. Every single one of us, all we have to do is sign up for a free account, and we're published authors out to the world, which is unprecedented in all of history. Throughout history, there were, compared to the bulk of humanity, a handful of voices that were being amplified out beyond a small circle of people that they knew. And you could go stand on a street corner in a lot of countries in historical time periods and talk at whoever's passing by, but you're going to reach essentially just an audience of how many people pass through that space in a given day, which is limited. We're all universally now authors and broadcasters if we choose to be, and most of us do choose to be just because it's simple to do so and it's become part of our world. I found this internet statistics site, which I just was kind of sat there in awe. It, like in real time, tracks from the start of today how many tweets have been sent, how many emails have been sent, how much web traffic there has been. And you can sit there and just watch these counters spooling. It also has what happens every second option. There's 8,000 tweets sent a second. What is it, 23 characters now? How many, does anybody know Twitter? We're all too old to really know Twitter. Is it 280? Okay. I don't know Twitter. You guys are young enough to be Twitter users. Uh, it's a weird thing when Facebook is like old people, but hey, there we go. So whatever, 8,000 times 280, you said? 280 characters. The sheer stream, the volume of words being shot out there, and I have no idea how many people see the average tweet. But the whole point of it is to get it out to several people at once. 63 gigabytes of internet traffic, and I have a very vague, it's one of those numbers that's so enormous that it's hard to imagine. It's like it's hard to imagine $1 billion. None of us, if you sit there and try to imagine, what would $1 billion look like stacked up? It's like, I don't know. It's a ridiculous number of bills. 63 gig of internet traffic a second all over the world. That's information going from somewhere to somewhere else every second across the globe. Which is all to say, our voices, when we talk about how much power our voices have, they have megaphones up to them right now that are really easy to use. Proverbs 10:19 says, "In the multitude of words, sin is not lacking, but he who restrains his lips is wise." And 8,000 tweets a second, is there any denying that's a multitude of words? Which means, according to the Proverbs, there is sin, a multitude of sin. I think about, too, just in me, and I think it's just the universal human heart, the urge to respond when given an opening to do so. One of the things I have to teach my interns, I have 2 interns in my department who also design scenery. They're usually fresh out of college, undergraduate training. They've maybe had 1 or 2 realized designs, maybe, that they've gotten to do while they're in school. Oftentimes those, so I'm using jargon. Realized design is a design that somebody actually took and built and turned into something, versus designs that you've done for classwork that are pretty pictures nobody had to actually make into a set. So they've actually gone through the process of sitting down with a team and actually having their stuff turned into reality, which, when you're dreaming on paper, involves a lot of how much is this going to cost? Will gravity actually let you do that? When you're done with it, will an actor actually be able to use it, and will it be an entertaining show? Will they actually be able to be served by what you've created? So they've had a little bit of experience, not much. And one of the big things I teach almost every single intern that I work with them on is when they're in a design meeting with a bunch of people and everybody's going, well, how big is that thing you've drew? And what is that going to be made out of? And what's that surface? And what color do you think you're going to use? Is to go, I don't know. I'll get back to you on it. Because our immediate impulse, my immediate impulse and these young interns is to go, let me come up with an answer for you. Somebody has asked me something. I have to answer you. I have to come up with something. And it takes a lot of effort to actually be able to hear a question and go, I don't really know the answer to that right now, but give me some time and I will get you an answer. And to have the confidence, because it feels like you're not rising to the occasion. It feels like I should know. So I bring that up thinking about when I open Facebook, or when I read a news article and there's a comment section underneath it, or when Twitter's there ready to put something out, or any of the other things that just are kind of an open question of, so what do you think? How are you feeling about this? The temptation is so strong there that it's become a marketing ploy. I'm going to give you a survey not because I care at all what you're going to say in response to the survey, but because if I say I'm going to ask you a question, you're going to click on it so that you can see my ad. It's a completely bogus survey. Nobody's on the receiving end of that information, but it makes me go, oh, I can give my opinion on this. How much is there just an anxiety out there for us to be responding, knowing that that's in our hearts for when somebody goes, so what do you think? Our initial impulse is, I better have something to say. What's that? Yeah. Do you really want to know? So let's go to James 3. My brethren, let not many of you become teachers, knowing that we shall receive a stricter judgment, for we all stumble or offend, depending on New King James or King James there, in many things. If anyone does not stumble in word, he's a perfect man, able also to bridle the whole body. I actually just back up and hit that, and I think of, let not many of you become teachers. And he's talking about what a snare is there for anybody who's given a platform, because it does open up. You've got a lot more words to put out there. I feel sorry for, it's a weird way to say something, but I have this weird, actually it is pity, it's probably not empathy, for morning talk show hosts on the radio. And I can't stand morning talk radio, but it ends up being played in the scene shop where I work sometimes. And the type of morning talk radio I'm talking about is where you typically have a man and a woman, or two men and a woman. There's sort of a format to it, and they kind of talk about things going on around town. They talk about news things. A lot of times they talk about celebrity news, and they offer commentary on it, and they make jokes. And the standard format, they make adult innuendo jokes is how they tend to work. But it's morning radio, so they have a limit for how far they can go and not get in trouble. So they're always riding this line of, we've got to be funny. And I worked radio when I was in college. I was a DJ for a little bit. You have the severe thing on radio of never have dead air, which just means there has to be something going out over those airwaves at all times. It is the cardinal sin of radio to have a moment where there is nothing on your station. Because then people are flipping through, they hear nothing, they just keep going. So here's this huge trap laid for these people. And you see them falling into it. They go too far, because how could you not, when you're given, a couple hours every morning to make jokes that are crude so that we'll all laugh at them about celebrities and situations, and yet not go so far that you're really going to offend anybody? What a tightrope to walk. And even news commentators, it's those who are given the responsibility of, you have to keep talking. You can't stop talking as long as you've got a space that's allotted for it. How in the world do you do that and not fall into a hole somewhere along there? And yet that's kind of culturally where we've reached this moment of this sort of microphone always being on, always. We've all come to this point of being put in this place of teachers we all have a platform to instruct the world on. So we're all in this place of the stricter judgment and the precariousness of always having an audience. for our younger generation, even more so than us, because of their culture that they've grown up in. So they're even more used to this constant microphone, constant performance. That's part of their lives. So he goes on to say, if anyone does not stumble in word, he's a perfect man, able also to bridle the whole body. Indeed, we put bits in horses' mouths, and they may obey us, and we turn their whole body. Look also at ships. Although they are so large and are driven by fierce winds, they are turned by a very small rudder, wherever the pilot desires. Even so, the tongue is a little member and boasts great things. So I know we talk about that quite a bit. It's sort of become a cultural thing in charismatic church of like, we know our word, what we say affects what we think. It's honestly not really all that unique to the church. It's a thing that self-help people in the world, in liberal self-help circles, are also, it's this sort of confession thing. Say where you want to go. Steers your heart. But then he goes on to see how great a forest a little fire kindles. And the tongue is a fire, a world of iniquity. The tongue is so set among our members that it defiles the whole body and sets on fire the course of nature, and it's set on fire by hell. James has no desire to soften what he's trying to say about how powerful what we speak is. And it's not just, if I complain a lot, I'm going to teach myself to be unsatisfied. It's not just if I speak derision, I'm going to teach myself to be proud. It's not just the steering of my soul, but it is a fire that kindles. And I read this and I'm thinking, what was he picturing when he's talking about this? As a leader in the first century church, I'm sure he's imagining gossip. He's imagining people coming up with strange doctrines that they then share with somebody, and somebody else gets excited about, and it catches like fire through a portion of the young church, and they all start steering off into strange heresies, like Gnosticism, one of the things they were battling then. Could he have even imagined what we call going viral, where anybody can post something, and if somebody else thinks it's interesting enough that they share it with somebody else, and enough people think it's interesting, it becomes what everybody sees that day. Well, almost everybody. What? What's that? Or yeah, or Stephanie sees a week later in a secondary source, but but it still gets out there. I mean, that's the kind of the amazing thing when you start turning off culture and you find out how many ways it still gets in, because you think you're doing something crazy and old-fashioned, like reading a newspaper, and in the newspaper is an article about something that went all over Facebook, and it's like, wait a minute, I'm reading a newspaper. Why should I be knowing what's going on Facebook? It gets out and it kindles and it spreads. And he's giving this, this really fierce, no holds barred, set on fire by hell, the tongue, in a day and age where, it took a really long time to get to the next town, and everything's done by word of mouth, and you could maybe stir up a city, to come collect in the square about something. But the fact that we can, have somebody say something stupid, and then a week later, after the entire, well, not even country, a chunk of the world has talked about it, they're getting fired by their employer because we've all decided, burn it down. How much more powerful is it now, this snare for our tongue? He goes on to say, for every kind of beast and bird, of reptile and creature of the sea is tamed and has been tamed by mankind, but no man can tame the tongue. It's an unruly evil full of deadly poison. With it we bless our God and Father, and with it we curse men who have been made in the similitude of God. Out of the same mouth proceed blessing and cursing. My brethren, these things ought not to be so. Does a spring set forth fresh water and bitter from the same opening? Can a fig tree, my brethren, bear olives, or a grapevine bear figs? Thus no spring yields both salt water and fresh. So clearly the answer is not stop talking. But the answer is not also to jump in to the world's multiple choice question that it provides to us. Right now, and probably always, but I'm always skeptical of seeing this moment in time as unique. But there are many ways in which it is unique. But I'm just skeptical. I don't want to do it easily. Because I also see how easy it is to go, our generation, or back when it was so much better, or, oh, this is so much better than it was before we had. It goes both ways. But right now, there's such a invitation to all of us to go, okay, so which is it, A or B? Who's right? Which side is God on? I had a moment just recently where I was taken aback by seeing the reactions to the construction on Westnedge, which at the time, because I was not paying attention, was being presented as a strike. And seeing fellow believers ranting and raving about how inconvenienced they were by the fact work wasn't happening on Westnedge, and slinging just horrible names at the workers. And then I thought, I really should know what's actually happening. Did a little research and found out they weren't on strike. They were actually locked out. It was the MITA I don't know. Anyway, it's the government, state government that oversees the roads getting fixed. Shut them down. Said, don't come to work. We're locking you out over a labor dispute that was happening over contracts. And because our local news gathering has become such a shadow of what it used to be, it's very hard to find any real information on it. But at least I could find, they weren't striking. And here's my fellow believers who are like, those idiots, they're shutting down Westnedge for their personal issue. And realizing, okay, so where is that coming from? I don't think it's just coming out of the fact that I can't get down Westnedge easily, that it's kind of a pain to wait a little bit longer in a single line of traffic. It's coming out of because we've been offered this A or B. Like, do you believe in the free market, and do you believe in the prosperity that comes out of people being able to start businesses, or do you believe in unions and in the working guy? And we're being presented with which side are you on all the time? And it's bigger than even are you on the side of the worker or of the working of the companies that provide jobs, because there's a whole bundle of, if you're on that side, then you should believe this and you should believe that about this unrelated thing, and there's this whole package of you buy into this camp, or if you're for working guys and unions and standing up for the little guys against the big corporations, then you're also swallowing all these other little things. You have to be yes for this, and you have to be yes for that, and you have to be against that. And the world wants to hand that out and go, okay, so is it A or is it B? And just a little bit of research, I'm looking at it and going, it's not clear. It's not so clear cut. And I don't actually have enough information to go, yeah, this shutdown was right, or yeah, the contracts should have said this. But Facebook's right there going, well, who's right and who's wrong about this? And the reason that I'm seeing people in the church go, oh, those stupid workers, and really saying horrible things about how they're striking, and they could have gone on strike at a better time when it wasn't going to completely shut down Westnedge. It's because they've bought into that camp. They're automatically going to come to this situation with a set of, you know what, I bought into option A. I'm a good free market conservative person. Therefore, those workers, they're just always after more and more and more. I'm bringing up some specifics because not to actually try to go one way's right or the other, and I'm going to hit a couple others that are probably even more hot button, but to give an example where I see this option being offered as A or B, and I feel the Lord going, did you listen to me? And do you know in this situation what my word is for it? And it's not going to be A or B. Luke 7:31. So I think it's helpful to have some specifics. The danger of specifics is that then the conversation becomes about that incident. But I feel like sometimes I'm a little too general when I share. So I felt like the Lord was saying, bring up some specifics of what I see provoking my response in this. I also feeling the Lord talk to me about how I spend a lot of time paying attention to national, international politics, and I don't take the effort to really pay attention to Kalamazoo and Portage and what's going on around here that I actually have a more legitimate voice in, to be able to say, hey, as a citizen of this city, I'm going to wait on the Lord and hear what he has to say, rather than shouting out into a 7.5 billion person mob that all have something to say about what's going on the national stage, which I think is both. I'm not saying I'm feeling like I'm supposed to ignore all the international stuff and just focus on, but I really don't. Father, forgive me, pay attention enough to what's going on around here so that I can pray into it and listen to the Lord and speak out if necessary. Luke 7:31, and the Lord said, to what then shall I liken the men of this generation? What are they like? They're like children sitting in the marketplace and calling to one another, saying, we played the flute for you, and you did not dance. We mourned for you, and you did not weep. For John the Baptist came neither eating bread nor drinking wine, and you say he has a demon. The Son of Man is come eating and drinking, and you say, look, a glutton and a winebibber and a friend of tax collectors and sinners. But wisdom is justified by all her children. I had a moment where I was kind of thinking about this and trying to imagine. There's like you get so familiar with Scripture, and you kind of read past it, and you're like, I've read that before, and it sparks the same things it has been in the past for you. You kind of read it the same way, and then sometimes you get that call from the Lord to like stop and really think about what the verse is saying. And I had always thought of these children as happy little children in the marketplace. And I had a moment where I'm like, if I'm imagining turn of the century Israel and the marketplace and kids that are there playing music, they're probably more likely to be beggar children than they are to be, some happy kids that just got done with Torah lessons and have gone out to, practice their instruments for the public. In this illustration, mightn't they be children who have brought their instruments or been set out there with their instruments by their parents in order to play tunes, in order to get money in the hat to feed their family and their brothers and sisters? Or maybe they don't even have parents and they're feeding their brothers and sisters with what's tossed their way because they're playing, which puts an interesting other spin on what he's saying to the Pharisees. It's not just, I'm playing music, and why aren't you, enjoying it the way I intended? It's also, why aren't you, why am I'm not getting anything out of it from you? It's been very clear for the last couple of years, and going back farther, but really sharp relief over the last couple of years, that the level of conversation has gone to the point that if you do not agree with me, then you are on the other side. And conversations I've had with people where you're trying to go, well, that's not entirely right. And they will not hear you say, they refuse to hear you say, that doesn't mean I'm on the other side. If I call into question a particular situation with, a labor dispute, and I'm like, I don't know about the employer, there are those who will be like, you know what? You're clearly a diehard liberal, and they will refuse to hear any kind of nuance, and it goes the other direction too. Actually, one that I've run across long before 2 years ago is there's that sacred thing in academic circles of like the horror of destroying a book. It's a book. And if you go, can you admit at least there might be maybe half a dozen books that probably should be wiped off the face of the earth? No, it's a book. Kind of thing. And it's not just, it's a book, but it's, you must be one of those people that, we were warned about by Bradbury who wants to go burn down libraries. No, but I am saying. Yeah. But it definitely heightened right to that a couple of years ago. And it became a thing of, you are either over there fully or you over here fully, and I will not hear anything other than those two things. And it's because of that influence and because of the receiving, we need people on our side in order to win. So if you're not fully on our side, you're undermining. We see it set up in our politics really big in, there's sort of this shouted conversation. On one side, you have people going over there and going, that's the party of sexual immorality and depravity, and New York and LA and everything is going to hell. And then you have another side going, it's all about greed and running over people and power. And so there's this question, okay, so that's the way the debate's been framed. So what do you think? Are you for greed or are you for sexual immorality? And there's no option to go, wait a minute. This is not God. And Jesus answers in the Sermon on the Mount back at both of those sides and says, here you are shouting about the people who are like, yeah, anything goes sexually, but have you ever looked with lust? You might as well get over into their camp. And he's looking over at the side that's like, oh yeah, you're condemning their hatred and their power and their greed, but have you ever wanted something somebody else had? Have you ever said, you're an idiot? You might as well join them in and point it back at you. And he takes us to a conversation that's so far above that, okay, which camp are we going to be on? Which side is God on? I had a little moment yesterday when I was thinking about this, when I was remembering. So because of Kavanaugh, I was thinking about the court of public opinion and how much of that conversation for that time was, do you think he's right or do you think she's right? You know, which one of them's telling the truth? And I was thinking about O.J. Simpson and Rodney King in the early 90s. And that's my earliest memory of, here's an accusation in the courts. Of course, you know, Kavanaugh wasn't in the courts, but here's a thing in the courts. And so much of the conversation is, let's go talk to people and find out which one they think is, you know, is he guilty or is he not guilty? And so much of the reporting was about, this is what people think. And of course, we saw a really strong line drawn based on what ethnic group are you in, whether or not you think somebody's guilty or not guilty. And if you look at it and you go, if people can divide based on whether or not the color of their skin is the same as the person being accused, or whether it is not, then clearly the vast majority are not speaking out of any sense of justice and understanding. And then we come to Kavanaugh, and it seems like, you know, there's this big, clear split, one where the other, essentially depending on your political party, which has got to mean justice is not pretty big in the equation for most. And while there's been a lot made out of the accusation and the furor over it being something to serve the Democrats, it seems to me like it actually served the Republicans too, because I didn't hear a lot of conversation about all the things that you'd think we'd be talking about with a Supreme Court justice, like his record on things. And I didn't hear a lot of, it's going to sound like I'm picking on labor stuff, but I didn't hear a lot of conversation about, okay, so this judge in his history, pretty much every time an employer and employee have an issue that goes before his bench, it's the employer he sided with. Without saying that I think, you know, power to the employee and we should be, you know, without siding that way, if it almost always goes one way, maybe we should be having a conversation about this guy who's going to be one of the top judges in the land from a conservative point of view of just loving justice. And I'm not saying I'm against him because of that. I'm saying, where was the conversation out of the church saying we love justice because our God is a just God and we should be trying to pick a justice that, yes, is on the side of unborn children, but is actually just when other cases come before him too, that it doesn't seem like it's really easy to predict he's always going to side one direction or the other. So so the nation got caught up in this like A or B. You know, is he a predator or isn't he? Which is important to know. And there should be voices going from the Lord, okay, patience is good. Understanding, trying to figure these things out is good. I mean, that's right. But we should also not be easily jumping into, oh, you know what, my politics are this way, I'm going to just declare, you know, innocent, or my politics are this way, I'm just going to declare guilty. We're falling right into the trap that the enemy sets. And we should be able to, going back to talking about my interns and me, we should be able to go, I'm not on a jury. I haven't seen people present a case before me. I don't know the history of either of these people beyond short, little, tiny articles that are being presented to me on the internet that don't go into a lot of depth. Or maybe I listened to like a 45-minute detailed thing, on radio. But I really can't say one is guilty or the other is, but I can be an advocate for the things that matter to the Lord in this situation and go, we should be seeking true justice here. We should be valuing truth. We should be not afraid and letting fear drive us into hastiness. We should be able to go, it's really not my place to say who's guilty and who's not guilty. And it's really not my place to say anything until I've really taken it before the Lord and listened, which is a really insanely difficult thing to do. Proverbs 17:28. So all of it, talking about all this stuff, it makes it sort of sound like we should just all keep our mouths shut, which is totally not true either, because we don't want to compromise the witness of truth that we've been given. We're supposed to stand up and speak truth. Proverbs 17:28 says, even a fool is counted wise when he holds his peace. When he shuts his lips, he is considered perceptive. And Proverbs 29:20 says, do you see a man hasty in his words? There's more hope for a fool than for him. And then back to good old James says in 1:19, so then, my beloved brethren, let every man be swift to hear, slow to speak, slow to wrath, for the wrath of man does not produce the righteousness of God. It's interesting that there are so many proverbs about holding your tongue and not speaking too much from a guy who wrote so many proverbs down and shared them with the world. He had a lot to say out of the wisdom that he was given. So the answer is not withdrawal. The answer is not, oh no, we're above all of this. But the answer is, we shouldn't be going, okay, so which camp in the world is correct? Let me listen to both of them, weigh them out, and side with one. We should be going to the Lord and going, Lord, is there a different question than's being asked here? Like you did with the Pharisees and the Sadducees. Do you see something deeper that I can speak a truth to that's going to last more than these little internet polls and more than this, day-long, week-long news cycle of let's have the entire world voice an opinion? Is there something deeper, truer from your heart, Lord? So it's not speaking, but it is slow to speak. And it's interesting that James connects. He flows right in, slow to speak and slow to anger. Talking about that, as he'll talk about later, that fire that could just be released in our moment of impassioned response to the open microphone. Because if we sound like one of the camps of men, that should probably be a big warning sign. Chances are that 49% of the people are not prophetically speaking from the Lord in this day and age. In any age, really. But if we were a Christian nation at some point, which can be debated, we certainly aren't by and large now. So if we have 49% of the nation saying A and 49% of the nation saying B, we probably have something to get from the Lord that doesn't fully side with either of those. Isaiah 55, 8 through 9, the prophet writes, "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, nor are your ways my ways, says the Lord. For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts." One of the things that I see being debated in the church right now is another A or B choice. There's a camp that's saying we have to infiltrate the places of power. We have to get believers inside so that it can be transformed. Everything can be transformed from the inside out. And we need them in all the institutions of men. And then you have another side that's like, you know what? It's time to separate out. None of this is working. The church has lost its influence. Let's cloister up. And Jesus has an answer in his prayer to the Father that doesn't offer A or B. Doesn't take A or B. In John 17:13. Right, come on up. "But now I come to you, and these things I speak in the world, that they may have my joy fulfilled in themselves. I've given them your word, and the world has hated them because they are not of the world, just as I'm not of the world. I do not pray that you should take them out of the world, but that you should keep them from the evil one. They are not of the world, just as I am not of the world. Sanctify them by your truth. Your word is truth. As you sent me into the world, I also have sent them into the world." He prays that we would not be separated out, that we would still be able to speak truth as his body to the world, but that we would not fall into the temptation of the evil one to become like the world. So, as I feel like the Lord has been talking to the church about speaking up. A church that has kind of gotten quiet on a lot of things. But speaking up doesn't mean siding with the right half of the world. So pray, Father, I'm asking for both boldness to share what you're saying and patience to wait until you've said it to us. Lord, would you help us with that temptation of that microphone that's in our faces 24 hours a day now. I just want to say what you're saying. And just settle my heart that you will speak when the time is right, that I don't have to be anxious about dead air. But then put a fire in me when you do give me words to say.